Welcome to No Excuses. My name is Mary Fran, and this is my place to talk about living my life to the fullest, doing everything, being happy, being amazing. And today I'm going to talk about what I read last week. Now, I do read on a Kindle, so I can't hold up the book, but just know that I did read it. And I read 3 books last week. The first book I read was actually another nonfiction. I read From Here to the Great Unknown. This is a book by Lisa Marie Presley and her daughter. Her daughter is actually the one that put it all together, wrote it, and finished it because her mother never finished it. And it starts from the time when Elvis was alive and Lisa Marie was living with Elvis. And she talked about how her parents did split and how she loved to be at Graceland with her father. She talked about the relationship she had with her father. Honestly, it sounded a little weird. They lived on a floor by themselves and they were the only people that were really allowed up there. I don't know. Just seemed rather odd to me. But, to each their own. And I've never lived with the fame of somebody like Elvis, so who knows. It go through all of those early experiences. And she was a wild child and she was encouraged to be a wild child by Elvis. It actually talks about his death. And she talked about that experience, about how, she's trying to mourn, but the world is also mourning, and a little bit about that. And then she talks about going to live with her mother full time and how, her mother just didn't have the time for her. And she talked about how, her mother was rather young and really didn't want to have a child when she was that young, and how it affected her. It talked about her early years of drug use and then how she cleaned herself up when she had kids. Her daughter kept writing that my childhood was fabulous. My mother loved me. My childhood was fabulous. But as I read, I'm just like, is it really fabulous? And she goes through their life. She goes through everything that happened. She goes through their times with Michael Jackson in their life and with this person and that person because, there were different husbands that came through. And she talked, about them. And she talked about her life and moving and living in England and then Hawaii and moving around and living in Florida. And then she talked about how the drugs came back into their lives and how it affected the relationships, how it affected everybody. The drugs and alcohol and lack of sobriety did end up killing Lisa Marie Presley's son and then, of course, herself also. It was a good book. It's a look at the other side. I actually struggled with certain aspects because the daughter is writing about how my childhood was fabulous, but yet she's talking about this and that and the other. And I'm just like, glad you think it's fabulous. There's some issues. There was a lot of red flags in it for me that I was like, that's not exactly fabulous, but to each their own. It was a good book. Like I said, I'm glad because I was able to see and experience what life would have been like if I was Elvis Presley's daughter. The next 2 books I read were both fiction. I was looking for something just really lighthearted. And, when I want something lighthearted, easy, fluff, I usually just go to romance because it is easy, it's fluff. 9 times out of 10, actually probably 99.999%, it ends happy and life is grand. And so, I typically go that route. So I was looking on Amazon Prime. If you don't know, if you have Prime, you do have some books that you can get each month free through Prime reading. And so I found this one, The Perfect Fit. I looked at it. I'm like, okay, whatever. I started to read the description and then I stopped. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Let's just read it and get on with it because I was wanting to read that day. So I started it. I should have read the description. Yeah, I should have. Because the book was actually about a girl and her experience falling in love. What could be wrong with that? The problem is she fell in love with 3 men. 3 best friends. Yes, this is a male, female story. Okay. And there was some male action. More than I wanted to read, but to each his own again. It's not something that I would have read myself by picking it out because I'm more of a traditional one-on-one person. But I read it, and once I started, I'm like, let's just finish it up and see how it ends. But I did read it. Rather interesting because, 3 men that are sharing this one woman, it's kind of weird. I'm kind of embarrassed to say I read this, but I did. So it was just kind of interesting. Not something I normally read, but I did finish it, much to my embarrassment. And it was an okay read. Once again, a different part of life that I wouldn't normally have read. The other issue I had with this book was the fact that it used the F word a lot. As an exclamation, as a verb, as an adjective. Take your pick, it used them all. Many, many times. I don't speak like that, and so hearing it and reading it constantly just kind of was like, oh my God, really? So, yeah, what it is. The last book I read was Drop Dead Sisters, and this was just a lighthearted kind of comedy, kind of a murder mystery. It's about a family, a quirky family, and 3 sisters, and the youngest one never felt like she belonged. She never felt like she was part of this sister because she was born much later. And they ended up going on a family vacation to celebrate their parents' anniversary. And mayhem and murder ensued. And through it, she found that her sisters were her allies. Yes, they were still making all kinds of comments to make her feel bad. So she thought. But her sisters stood by her side. As sisters should. And through it all, she realized that her sisters were making those comments not because of thinking she was, less than them. They were doing it because that was just who they are, and they were hiding their own insecurities. And they all had their own problems. They had all this, and they actually came together and they started building a relationship, years after the fact. It was a good book. There was a murder here, and things happened. The body disappeared once or twice, and it was good. You really didn't know who did it until almost the bitter end. So it was a good book. It was a lighthearted. It was fun. I have no complaints. How did I rate the books? I rated the Elvis book a 3. Solid read. Mr. Perfect, the second book, was a 3, a low 3. It was a solid read. I want to rate it a 2 just because it's not my cup of tea. It was a solid read. Low. If I'm throwing in what my likes are, I would rate it a 2 because it's not something that I typically go for. But solid read. Drop Dead Sisters was a high 3 because it was just a good, solid book. It was a good feel good. You were curious. You wanted to see how it ended. Yet you wanted to see the play between these sisters and the family and find out what the family was going to do. So it was a good solid 3 also. So all 3 were a solid 3. Can't beat that. I rate most of my books 3. It has to be stellar for me to go higher. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Have you read any of these books? And you don't have to admit if you've read the second one, Mr. Perfect, because, I'm embarrassed to admit that I read that one. But if you've read it and you want to share it with me, let me know. I'd love to hear. Anyway, get out, read, live your life. Have a great day. No excuses.